There is a particular kind of person who will walk into a room full of conversation and noise, and instead of joining in, they quietly notice the one person standing slightly apart from the group, the one whose smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, the one who laughs a half second after everyone else, as if they had to decide whether it was safe to. Everyone else is talking. This person is reading. They'll catch the exact moment a meeting shifts from collaborative to political before a single word confirms it. They'll hear what wasn't said in a conversation and carry it home like a stone. They absorb the emotional weather of every room they walk into, whether they want to or not. You probably know someone like this. Or maybe, if you're being honest, you recognized yourself somewhere in those first few sentences, and something in you went very still. If so, stay with me, because what's happening inside you is far more complex and far more valuable than anyone has probably told you. Most people, when they encounter someone like this, will call it a gift. They'll say things like, "You're so intuitive," or "You always just know things." And they say it the way you'd compliment someone on a beautiful coat. But here is what they don't say, what they probably can't see from where they're standing. That same perception doesn't switch off when you leave the room. It doesn't pause when you're tired. It doesn't get quieter just because you've asked it to. You don't just see what others don't, you feel it too. And feeling everything at that resolution has a cost that most people will never fully understand. The gift and the weight are not two separate things. They are the exact same thing experienced from two different angles. And the question this video is really asking is not whether you have this, it's whether you understand what it's doing to you and what you can do with it. Psychology generally traces this kind of perceptual depth back to two distinct branches, and understanding which one applies to you, or whether both do, changes everything about how you relate to it. The first branch is biological. Research in neuroscience, particularly around sensory processing sensitivity, first described by psychologist Elaine Aron, suggests that somewhere between 15 and 20% of the population has a nervous system that quite literally processes information more deeply. Not faster necessarily, but with more layers of cross-referencing, more emotional association, more noticing of subtleties that others filter out before they ever become conscious thoughts. If this is you, it's not a character flaw that accumulated over time. It's architecture. It was in you before anyone or anything shaped you. The second branch is formed rather than innate. When a child grows up in an environment where emotional safety is inconsistent, where a parent's mood was unpredictable, where conflict was unspoken but always present, where reading the room was a survival strategy rather than a preference, the nervous system adapts. It develops an almost radar-like attunement to other people's internal states, because back then, detecting a shift in someone's energy wasn't curiosity, it was protection. If the first branch is a telescope you were born with, the second one is a telescope you built, ground lens by lens, out of necessity. Both give you extraordinary range, and neither one makes you broken. You are not a person who is too sensitive for the world. You are a person who has been carrying a very precise instrument in a world that rarely knew how to handle it carefully. Let's talk about what this actually looks like. Not in abstract terms, but in the specific, mundane, Tuesday afternoon texture of your actual life. Because that's where this lives, not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary ones. Sign 1. Emotional absorption. Mirror neuron hyperactivation. Empathic resonance. You walk into a space where someone had an argument an hour ago. The argument is over, they've moved on, they're both at their desks, and you feel it. There's no evidence, there's nothing anyone said, but there's a residue in the room, something slightly off in the quality of the silence, and your nervous system has already logged it before your conscious mind had a word for it. The scientific concept here is mirror neuron hyperactivation. your brain's empathic circuitry firing at a higher amplitude than average, essentially simulating other people's internal states inside your own body. The consequence is that you often walk into situations already carrying other people's emotional weight, and you may not realize until much later that what you've been feeling all day wasn't yours to begin with. Sign 2. The subtext reader. Incongruence detection. Implicit communication processing. Someone tells you they're fine, and you believe the words about as much as you'd believe a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. It's not that you're suspicious or paranoid, it's that you're picking up on 100 small things simultaneously. A microsecond of hesitation before the word fine, a slight tightening around the eyes, the way their answer was just a fraction too quick, too clean. Psychologists call this incongruence detection, the gap between what someone's verbal and nonverbal channels are communicating.
Most people pick up on obvious incongruence. You pick up on the subtle kind, the kind the person themselves might not be consciously aware of yet. And the emotional consequence of this particular gift is a quiet, constant loneliness, because you are perpetually aware of a layer of reality that most conversations never acknowledge. Sign 3. Pattern architect. Deep processing, associative cognition. 3 weeks into a new job, you already have a working theory about the organizational dynamics, who defers to whom, where the real decisions are made, which relationships are more fragile than they appear. You didn't sit down and analyze this, you just noticed things, the way you notice things, and at some point the pattern assembled itself. This is a cognitive phenomenon called deep processing. Your brain tends to continue working on information long after the initial input, making connections across domains, running it against memory and intuition and everything else you've ever absorbed. The cost of this is that your mind is rarely fully at rest. You can't watch a film without tracking the subtext of every character's behavior. You can't have a conversation without simultaneously processing what the conversation is really about. It is exhausting in the way that running a complex background program is exhausting. Not visible, but constant, and it drains the battery. Sign 4. The processing delay. Overstimulation, integration lag. After a long social event, a party, a day of back-to-back meetings, a family gathering, you need an amount of alone time that might puzzle the people around you. Not because you didn't enjoy yourself, not because anything went wrong, but because the depth at which you are processing every interaction means that your nervous system has accumulated a significant backlog, and it needs time and quiet to integrate what it absorbed. This is sometimes misread as introversion, and while there's overlap, it's more specific than that. It is the neurological consequence of running high-resolution perception all day in a high-stimulus environment. The emotional result is that you often feel most yourself when you are alone, and then feel guilty or strange for needing that in a world that frames constant social availability as a virtue. Sign 5. The emotional memory bank. Emotionally encoded memory, heightened amygdala reactivity. You remember the specific quality of the light the afternoon a friendship ended, not because you were trying to, but because your brain tagged that experience with enough emotional intensity that it encoded deeply across multiple memory systems. You remember how someone made you feel in a single, unremarkable conversation 3 years ago, even if you've forgotten most of what was said. Neuroscience describes this as heightened amygdala reactivity, your brain's emotional center responding to significant experiences with enough force that they become vivid, layered memories rather than faint impressions. The consequence is that you carry both joy and pain with more fidelity than most people do. The beautiful moments stay, but so do the difficult ones, and they stay with a detail and a weight that can sometimes make it harder to leave the past in the past. Sign 6. The prophetic unease. Somatic intelligence, precognitive pattern recognition. There is a particular kind of knowing you have that arrives as a physical sensation before it becomes a thought, a tightness in the chest, an inexplicable restlessness, a feeling that something is off before you could name what. 6 weeks later, the thing you couldn't name makes itself visible to everyone else, and people are surprised. You were not surprised. You'd been carrying that low-level signal for weeks, trying to talk yourself out of it, telling yourself you were being irrational. What psychology would describe as somatic intelligence, the body integrating subtle environmental and relational information and surfacing it as felt sensation before the conscious mind catches up, is often misread as anxiety or overthinking by the people who experience it most acutely. The consequence is a deep, cumulative distrust of your own knowing, built up over years of being told what you sensed wasn't real. Here is where it gets more complicated, and this is the part that most conversations about sensitivity and perception never reach, which is exactly why so many people who experience this still feel fundamentally misunderstood even after everything they've read or been told. When all 6 of those patterns run simultaneously over years without adequate language or acknowledgement, the brain begins to adapt in ways that are quietly, insidiously self-defeating. It starts to use the same perceptual machinery that gives you your greatest strengths as a defense mechanism against further pain. You begin to scan for threat in relationships rather than for connection. You become so skilled at reading what someone might be feeling that you start preemptively adjusting yourself to manage it before they've said a word, before they've done anything, because somewhere in your nervous system a pattern has been recognized and the old script activates. Psychology would describe this as hyper-vigilant attunement, the same gift that lets you feel a room turned inward and weaponized into a permanent alertness to potential rejection or conflict. The feedback loop it creates is a difficult one. The more you suppress your own signal to manage others' comfort, the less you trust your perception. The less you trust your perception, the more external validation you seek. The more you expose yourself to exactly the kind of relational dynamics that originally conditioned the hypervigilance. And the cycle continues, not because you are weak or broken, but because you are using an extraordinarily powerful tool, without a manual, in a world that rarely helped you understand what it was. Let's be honest about something before we go further. You cannot simply turn this off. You cannot decide to process less deeply, to absorb fewer signals, to feel with less resolution. That is not how any of this works, biologically or psychologically. And any framework that tells you the solution is to become less of what you are is not a solution.
It is just a more sophisticated way of asking you to disappear. The work is not subtraction, it is translation. Principle 1. Change what you do with what you perceive, not what you perceive. There's a critical distinction between receiving information and being obligated to act on it. You will notice the tightness in someone's jaw. You will feel the shift in a room's energy. You will pick up the subtext in the message. That will happen regardless. What is trainable, genuinely practically trainable, is the moment between perception and response. The pause where you decide what this information is for, whether it belongs to you, and what, if anything, it is asking of you. This is the work of developing what researchers call a differentiated self, the capacity to feel deeply into another person's experience without losing the thread of your own. It is not distance, it is discernment, and it is a learnable skill, not a character trait you either have or you don't. Principle 2. Recalibrate the relationship between your body's signal and your conscious trust in it. One of the most consistent patterns in people with high perceptual sensitivity is a paradoxical distrust of their own perception, developed precisely because that perception was dismissed or pathologized often enough that they learned to override it. The recalibration doesn't happen through affirmations or self-talk. It happens through small, accumulating acts of honoring the signal, writing it down before you second-guess it, tracking which of your intuitions were correct, noticing when you felt something that turned out to be accurate and had talked yourself out of acting on it. Over time, this rebuilds what was systematically undermined, a working trust between your perceptual intelligence and your conscious decision-making. They were always meant to be collaborators. They just stopped talking to each other. Principle 3. Build boundaries that work with your nervous system, not against it. Conventional advice about boundaries assumes a level of energetic uniformity that simply doesn't apply here. What depletes you, what restores you, what kind of relational dynamics are genuinely nourishing versus ones that feel compelling but leave you emptied, these are specific to how your particular system works, and they require honest, individualized mapping rather than generic prescriptions. This might mean structuring your days to include genuine solitude, not as a reward for productivity, but as a biological requirement for integration. It might mean being more selective about the environments you put yourself in voluntarily, not because you can't handle them, but because just because you can handle something doesn't mean it's good for you. And it almost certainly means developing the language to tell the people closest to you what you actually need, rather than absorbing what they need and hoping they'll eventually notice what that costs. This perception of yours, this deep, exhausting, extraordinary capacity to see what others don't, it does not disappear. It does not become less, but it transforms in the way that all energy transforms. It finds a more sustainable form when it is understood rather than suppressed, directed rather than simply endured. There's a specific quality of light that a prism produces. Not light that is stronger than regular light, but light that has been understood deeply enough to reveal everything it was already carrying. The same beam, the same photons, the same energy, just seen more completely. The world has plenty of bright lights. What it rarely has is people who know how to let light fully through, who have developed, at real cost and over real time, the capacity to be present to what is actually happening, beneath all the noise that most people never look past. That is what you are. Not too much, not broken, not something that needs to be quieted or managed or apologized for. A prism. And the question you get to answer from here is not whether to have this, you always will, but how to stop letting it illuminate everything and everyone around you while you stand in the dark yourself. If something in this video made you go still, if you found yourself thinking, that's exactly it, but I've never heard anyone say it that way before, leave a comment below and tell me the specific moment. Not because the algorithm likes comments, but because the people in the comments section of a video like this tend to find each other in ways that matter. There is something quietly powerful about a space where the people who usually see everything finally get to be seen themselves. And if there is someone in your life who has been described as too sensitive, who seems to carry the weight of every room they walk into, who notices things no one else notices and often can't explain how, share this with them. Not as a diagnosis, just as a mirror. Sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is simply the experience of being recognized.